He might have to call in with his phone. Maybe.
Okay, so like I said, Kalita's going to start this off like she would normally, and then she'll hand it to me, and I'll.
Okay, we're live. Oh, we have people. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for MLCC. And as you know from your e-blast, it is Chamber Day. And today's topic is what are we going to do with that $300 million that's been allocated for the Stop 6 area, and talking about all the displacement from Cabell Place. So our speaker today will be introduced by Daryl Brewer. He's the Economic Development Manager for the Fort Worth Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce. We're going to pause real quickly for our opening prayer, which I will do. If you would bow your heads. Thank you, God, so much for the opportunity to be with each other today, virtually and digitally. And we thank you for the opportunities to work with our communities and to share pertinent information with the community that impacts their lives. We pray that you keep us all safe during this unprecedented time and give us wisdom and discernment as we hear the information that we'll hear today, and that we use it wisely. Thank you and amen.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to Daryl Brewer from the Fort Worth Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you, Kalita. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy that you were able to tune in with us. We got something new going on, the Zoom meeting. The only thing that I miss two things. I miss your presence, and I miss some food. So I'm looking forward to getting over this process so that we can get back to enjoying fellowship and food. Today we have an exciting presentation. As Kalita said, there's some $300 million that is planned for the redevelopment of Stop 6. And, you know, it starts with the redevelopment of what we call the projects. For older people, you know, it's the bricks and the sticks. We're talking about the bricks, the red bricks in Stop 6. And that starts with the $35 million grant that we received from the federal government. So we have today, we have two distinguished guests. We have Mr. Brian Dennison. He's a senior vice president with the Fort Worth Housing Solutions, formerly Fort Worth Housing Authority, as most of us may have grown up knowing it. And with him, he is bringing Louis Bernardi. He is a senior vice president of development, and for the developer for the project. And I'm sure Brian will get into more detail and introduce him. So I need to check right now and see if we have Brian connected yet. We've been having a little technical difficulty. Not quite the same.
Hear me okay?
We got Brian. I hear you.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Whoa, now I see you.
There you go. Okay. Thank you, Daryl.
You're welcome. So take it away, Brian.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining the call and the meeting this afternoon. And this is really an exciting time for us, not just Fort Worth Housing Solutions, but the city of Fort Worth. I really think more importantly, Stop 6 to really know that we've got a huge undertaking coming up over these next several years. I wanted to just go back and maybe before we get into what I'm going to describe, the nuts and bolts of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative and Stop 6 and the role that we're playing, et cetera, is to give everyone just kind of a context or a background that this just didn't pop up. We're having this meeting today. This has been 10 plus years of very, very hard work, a lot of meetings, a lot of phone calls, a lot of identifying best practices. And for us, when I'm saying us, I'm referring to Fort Worth Housing Solutions, it starts back in 2010. That gives us a 10-year running start. In that, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Barbara Holson, but during that time, she was the president and CEO of Fort Worth Housing Solutions. And we bought in this business model called a mixed income model, where we were blending market rate and affordable together and really deconcentrating this notion of a concentration of poverty in one area. And so that was the genesis of how it got started. We spent a lot of time talking with the city of Fort Worth. You know, we'd like for you to join us here. How do we do it? What do we do? What are some of the places that need to take place, et cetera? And so we put together in 2010, what's called a Stop 6 transformation plan. We actually took about a year to complete. In that plan, it included the Fort Worth Housing Authority at that time, the Cabell residents, and the city of Fort Worth. And we engaged a third-party consultant called Gilmore King. Gilmore King is just significantly credible because of their work in New Orleans and when they had the Katrina issue. And then we also had local representation of Freeze and Nickel on the engineering and design side. We put together what is known on the records as a Stop 6 transformation plan that was approved and adapted by the City of Fort Worth Council in 2012, and also the Fort Worth Housing Solutions Council. It was that plan that got started with many of the initiatives that are taking place right now. For those of you who don't know, in 2017, we had Stop 6 neighborhood improvement strategy. That included safety measures. You'll know them as cameras on poles. You know them as sidewalks, and really just cleaning up the area of blight, etc. And then fast forward to last year, 2019, we had a 1-year head start on the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant. So when you hear what's referred to CNI is just simply an acronym for Choice Neighborhood Initiative Grant. That is a HUD program that is awarded annually. And the awards come out from a national standpoint, maybe 4, possibly 5 winners annually. And so it's not for everybody. And so we've had a kind of a running start on this year. With that, we put together a team that we'll talk about when we go through that. But in November of 2019, we submitted our application to HUD. And what do you know, in April of this year, we were awarded and we had the maximum amount, which is $35 million. So it's a tremendous honor and also a tremendous group of work ahead of us in order to implement this. So that's a little bit about the background. We want to go into the details, but I don't know if the details would have a right context if we didn't give you the background on that. So, you know, starting with that, I'll introduce Louis Bernardi. Lou is a senior vice president, and he's a director for development for McCormick Barron Salazar for the Texas region and the Southwest region. We engaged them last year, and it wasn't a complicated engagement. Their group has been the successful recipient of 10+ Choice Neighborhood or CNI awards. So we went after them, and I guess they were looking for us. So we made a great relationship together and started to put together the team. And so with that team, I'll let Lou go through kind of some of who our relationships that we have with them. And I just wanted to make sure I introduced him. Lou, will you please say hello, and then we'll get this meeting started.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me as well to the meeting. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. As Brian said, our firm, McCormick Barron Salazar, has been in the business of working in neighborhoods and urban cities across the country for almost 50 years now. Since the early 90s, our company has been involved in programs such as the HUD Choice Neighborhood Implementation. The predecessor to Choice Neighborhoods is Hope 6. and our firm have been working on Hope 6 redevelopments with cities and housing authorities across the country, again, since the early 90s. So the transition to choice after which President Obama's signature HUD program was very easy for us. We had built, I think, as a firm, capability and capacity, certainly an experience in working in urban cities across the country with this program. So we're very pleased to be able to partner with the Fort Worth Housing Authority and the city of Fort Worth to engage in the Stop 6 redevelopment plan. And I think we have a great team put together, and very, very much looking forward to working together over the course of the next several years on the implementation. This is a long-term investment on the part of many partners, public and private, and participation among a number of stakeholders, again, public and private, including neighborhood residents, business folks, and other stakeholders in the community and the city. So it's a very, very large group effort. Our role specifically is to be the housing lead in partnership with Fort Worth Housing Solutions. So as the master developer, we're responsible for the planning, design, and execution of any new multifamily development that will occur as part of the Stop 6 plan. And I have a PowerPoint that I can run you through and begin that at any time. I can share my screen.
And Lou, while you're pulling that up, let me just go through what we expect to accomplish today in terms of an agenda. We want to describe who the C&I implementation team is. We'll talk about community engagement. We'll talk about the neighborhood vision. We'll talk about the housing vision. We'll talk through the housing phases, which we'll go through specifically with how we start, kind of how we end, and with those housing phases, what does the design look like? Kind of a schedule, a timeline, and then we'll talk specifically about phase 1, which is Cowan Place, which is taking place real time today. We'll talk through next steps, and then we will end with any discussion and or questions as time permits. So please, Luke, please.
Right. Are you able to see my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me go back to share.
There you go, Luke.
Okay. So again, as Brian indicated, we have an agenda for you. He just ran down. Let me just begin to share with you the implementation to this is a significant partnership that involves a lot of institutions. Again, the leads of the Fort Worth Housing Solutions as the lead applicant, and the city of Fort Worth as the co-applicant. There are a number of consultants, CBR Associates, working with Fort Worth Housing Solutions, and ourselves, McCormick, Barron, Salazar, as the housing lead. We had a master planning firm that helped us review the previous master plan and update it. Urban Design Associates, again, residents and stakeholders of Stop 6 neighborhood are key to this whole effort. Fort Worth ISD. Urban Strategies is a nonprofit organization that is the what's called the people lead. The city of Fort Worth is the neighborhood lead. And again, a lot of participation will occur with service providers, larger institutions in the area and in the community, in the city, and philanthropy and certainly employers. So a lot of what we do requires a significant amount of community engagement, and that occurs always with respect to our company. Our approach is always to begin with community engagement, and it's the natural process for choice. Again, this is taking a look at the previous plan that had been adopted and approved for Cavill and Stop 6, and getting folks together to look at envisioning what kind of revisions and updates people would like to see to that plan. So we had a number of meetings open to the public, met also with smaller groups and stakeholders throughout that process. And all that culminated in a number of not only presentations, but also work sessions to get feedback from folks about the concepts and the plans, what folks thought would work, what folks thought would not work, what they would like to see, not only in terms of street grids, but public improvements, community and neighborhood improvements, but also what did they see relative to, or what did they want relative to how housing, the housing development would look like. This is a map of the footprint of choice. HUD requires a significant map and area that's defined as the choice neighborhood footprint.
Lou,
Yes.
let me
Yes.
interrupt you because we are still seeing the same screen. So you didn't pop your screen up. So you're going down through things and we're just seeing the one initial screen.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So you need to go to, what does it say, slide view, or there you go. Or because it,
Can you see, what do you see now?
I see the neighborhood vision, but
Okay.
slideshow is what you want to be on.
You can go up where it says from current slide.
Oh, went to the right of that. Oh yeah. Yep. I'm sorry.
Can you
Denise,
see,
go ahead.
can you see the full screen, or are you seeing the partial screen?
Sure.
I can't fix that for some reason.
They're asking that you go to the second slide. Or actually started from the beginning.
Or
What do
okay,
you see
right
now?
there. That's right there is good. The Trust Neighborhood Initiative.
Okay.
You talked about that, but now people get to see the actual.
Okay, good. I'm sorry about that. I didn't know that was occurring. I've gotten out a slideshow. I'll just go through each of the slides on my computer.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm having the problem, but
Okay.
anyway. So yes, this is the team and combination of team members and other institutions, organizations, individuals, et cetera, that will be involved in the process. Again, when I talked a lot about community engagement, we had several meetings throughout the planning process. And I think we really had some great participation on the part of not only residents of Cabell, but also residents of the neighborhood, stakeholders, business, the churches and pastors, and again, just a myriad of folks who came out to meetings and provided input and their ideas and thoughts and solutions for how to improve the neighborhood. And so what you see here is a map of the defined choice footprint. I'll go through it in more detail, but it kind of lays out the parameters. If you can see you see my mouse moving?
Yes.
So the edge here is at Miller and Rosedale. This is sort of one of the boundaries. The north beyond Rosedale, this side of the railroad tracks. And it gives you a sense of what the area covers and the footprint covers. It's less than 2 square miles. And there's a lot of focus around the existing Cabell public housing site, as well as developments, different corners and areas of sections of the mapped area. I'll go through each of these phases in a moment. As Brian was indicated, our role is to implement the housing plan as the master developer, and as the vision for the housing really is based on a number of principles, creating a neighborhood that would accommodate families, design compact and pedestrian friendly development, interconnected streets and sidewalks with defensible open spaces, high quality housing with off-street parking. The housing that we build in partnership with our partners is to market rate standards with market rate amenities. We want to make sure that, as Brian indicated, a goal is to deconcentrate poverty. One of the requirements of the choice grant for the housing authority is to agree to a 1-for-1 replacement. So the 300 units that were on Cabell, families there, those 300 units will be replaced throughout 6 new phases of development. Residents that at Cabell have a choice of returning to the new developments. Again, there are multiple phases, mixed income, which really means that there's a distribution of former public housing residents, affordable units, or units for former Cabell residents, affordable housing units, as well as unrestricted market rate units throughout each of the developments, and dispersing those throughout the neighborhood. Again, a blend of mixed income. There's a reliance on some of the historic characteristics of the neighborhood to make sure that that's not lost and can be incorporated in some of the new design. Again, a right to return for families who are at Cabell, and the densities that we're providing or proposing here, we feel are within appropriate levels, and total there's a plan for approximately 990 units, and that will help accomplish what Brian was talking about earlier, deconcentration of poverty, creating a new mixed income, economically integrated community, giving folks choices of the type of housing that they'd like to live in, and also the opportunity for folks to remain in the community and for others to stay in the community in some new housing. This side plan kind of gives you an idea of the development. If you can see my cursor, our first phase is a senior development, and it's at Rosedale and Stalcup. I'll show you a map in a second that'll go through the other phases, but this kind of lays out all the phases in the proposed development. As you can see, there's a concentration of new development around the existing Cabell site, but it also incorporates new development along Rosedale that includes mixed use as well as mixed income.
Lou, if I can add one thing to that,
Sure.
In terms of the principles, I think that it was important, and what we got from the neighborhood meetings was that we wanted a walkable community. We wanted amenities to, in terms of retail, et cetera, that could possibly augment the housing. So it wasn't just a concentration of housing units. It was truly a design for, for retail. A lot of people said they wanted restaurants. They want, there was a lot of things. Although Lou was describing the housing piece of this, there are some other components to it, such as retail, that will make it much more of a walkable and what we're describing as a sustainable community.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, as you can see here along Rosedale, these L-shaped buildings represent elevator buildings that have ground floor non-residential uses for retail, also locating property management, community services along Rosedale. As you go down into the neighborhood a little bit, on the Cabell proper site, there's a different type of housing product. It consists of 3-story walk-up garden buildings as well as townhome buildings. And that kind of begins to change the density from a higher density along Rosedale to a lower density as you get into the neighborhood. Kind of conforms with the single family community to the south. This gives you an indication again on the map of the footprint, what our phasing is. As I said, our first phase is a senior development here at Rosedale and Stalcup. I'll show you the numbers shortly. Our second phase again incorporates part of the sites that the Housing Authority controls along Rosedale, as well as portion of the Cabell proper site, again, to create that new presence along Rosedale and create different housing types that allow families to begin to return to the neighborhood in a garden and townhome style. We then proceed to a third phase of the same type of development along Rosedale and back into the neighborhood. And then the fourth phase completes the development on the Cabell proper site. And to the right here, you see me with the cursor is the location. This is part of the Cabell proper site, but it's also will be the location, proposed location for, it's called a community hub, which will be a very large community center that will be providing services for the community. And I think Brian can talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. As you know, there are improvements here in the park that are ongoing. Down here at Ramey is a smaller fifth phase of what will be townhome garden style buildings. And then the final phase would be our number 6 phase at Rosedale and Miller, which is a more of a mixed, it is a mixed income. It will include some of the replacement units, but also half of the units proposed there would be unrestricted income or market rate. Again, this is just another map that kind of breaks down the phases. As I said, phase 1 and phase 2 kind of gives you a sense of what the blocks are and how the development will proceed. And we kind of put it together here, included here on the right, bottom right-hand corner, a rendering of the community hub, so you get a sense of what the vision is for it. Again, had a lot of input during the master planning process from the community. From service providers, organizations that want to be a part of it. And Brian, I don't know if you want to add a little bit more about that as well. It's one of the neighborhood critical community improvements that's part of the choice plan.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. I'll pick that up. The facility that Lou just described will be a combination of just a community building that will house, daycare services. It will house a library that was formerly on Cabell. It will house a police substation. We'll also have a neighborhood pool that's there for the neighborhood. It will provide much requested and needed community services and housed in one facility. That part will be operated by the city of Fort Worth, who is our co-applicant on that. That will come, I think, although Lou described the phases, that will come somewhere in between phase 3 and phase 4. And the funding source for that will be a combination of bond funds, possibly new market tax credits, and other funding sources in order to make that a spectacular place. So one other thing that it will house that is critical, at least from HUD's standpoint, and that's the Envision Center. And the Envision Center will take the place of some of the activities for public housing residents, and also be a community hub to bring residents together in one location.
Thanks, Brian. The next slide gives you a sense of what the overall mix of the units would be for each of the phases. Again, we're looking at approximately 990 units. The first phase is senior development. Right now, we're kind of looking at reprogramming. We originally had a plan for 122 units. We're looking to enlarge that to 174 or so units. So we're working on that plan right now. Again, gives you a sense of the percentage or the number of market rate units as compared to the total units that will be targeted for workforce, units here that are affordable under the low-income housing tax credit program. And this gives you a sense here, the PBV column gives you a sense of the planned distribution of the 300 existing Cabell units, and where they are envisioned or planned to go relative to the phases. So as you can see, they're spread out and purposely so that we can define the right unit type for families, and also make sure that they're distributed equally and equitably across all the development phases. So again, this is the first phase. This is sort of a concept site plan that we're working on. It's different than the original plan. As I said, it expands the from 122 to 174 units. So we're in the early schematic planning stages of that. We have an architect on board and a general contractor as part of our team on this particular phase. And so we're working with our team to develop the concept and develop the initial schematic plan for it.
No, I'd like to say one thing about Common Place, and maybe not just its significance with being the first phase that kind of comes out of the ground, but maybe I'm just overly juiced by it, but I think it's going to be one that's pretty spectacular for the area, with the new road work done from 820 all the way through on Rosedale into downtown. We really wanted to come out our first phase with something that really exceeded expectations, and to some extent says, "Hello, welcome to the new Stop 6 with this project." And so that's the best way I can describe it. What you see on this kind of the schematic component here, when it does come out of the ground, it will be one of those wow properties. And I'm not trying to sell anything other than that's our expectation. And I want you all to hold us to that it will be spectacular.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, absolutely. We want to get out of the gate and come out with something very, very impressive that the community deserves, the residents of the area deserve. This will give you a sense of some of the architecture that we're thinking came out of the master planning process. This perspective is from Rosedale, looking south down Amanda. You can see the concept is to have mixed use. These are the corners we're looking at right here. The concept is to have mixed use, ground floor, office, retail, 3-story buildings to accommodate housing near here. We're looking at about 9,500 square feet of management space, which you see on the right here, hovering with my cursor, is along Rosedale, this purple shaded area. Our property management offices will be located here. It's important for us. Our usual approach is to make sure that we try to build that property management space in the early phases so that we can do a better job and a good job with respect to pre-leasing and leasing, engaging the community on the opportunities that will be coming to the neighborhood. Also gives an opportunity for our team to look at monitor the pool area and some of the other amenities that are in that building. And then there's also a plan for over 16,000 square feet of commercial space. Brian discussed earlier that could be for neighborhood-based retail, could be for service providers, medical, etc. So we'll be planning that space accordingly as we move forward with the planning. This gives you another sense as we move along Rosedale again, some of the concepts relative to design, ground floor retail spaces, residential above, trying to build in sort of the architectural flavor of the neighborhood and the consideration of this history with Stop 6. As you go in south into the neighborhood, this is the garden style townhome kind of concept that we're talking about. 2-story, walk up, front doors facing the street, all parking, as you can see, is within the blocks. Open areas for play, recreation in the blocks as well. gives us a chance to really put eyes on the street relative to new development, get folks to make sure they meet each other, know each other, and have sort of a single family kind of feel in larger buildings that are multifamily. So there's again some of the concepts for the architecture. This is the Ramey and the Miller site. Again, just give you a sense of how the buildings might lay out on those sites. And just looking at the townhome and townhomes or townhouses that we're talking about, these are some of the themes that we came up with and got some input on throughout the master planning process. Again, kind of gives you an idea of the proposed architecture, some of the design style that could be incorporated into the neighborhood. We don't want to make all the buildings look the same. Our approach has always been to be cognizant of the history and the neighborhood architecture, but also provide really a neighborhood feel. Not every house on the block is the same, and so we feel the same relative to our development. It fits well, and not only from a density perspective, but also just a scale perspective in terms of the building types and massing. This is what we call garden buildings, which are 3-story walk-ups. They don't have elevators. They're stacked units, but again, gives you a sense of the different architectural style and flavor that we can incorporate into these building types. This goes back to some of the concepts for the mixed-use buildings along Rosedale and Amanda and Etta. Again, gives you a sense of the massing. So we try to incorporate different building materials, colors, offsets in terms of buildings to make sure that there's just not a line of buildings that folks will be looking at, but something that looks great. People like, they want to come to, they want to live there, and grow their businesses there. This gives you a sense of what the timeline is. As I mentioned, this is a really long-term proposition, not only in terms of the physical work that's going to take place over the next 6 years or so, but also as the beginning of a very, very long-term investment to help transition and transform the neighborhood. And as Brian said, it's not just the housing and the construction elements, the public improvements, street improvements, etc. It's also how do we make sure that the other components are moving forward for implementation as well, which the people component and the neighborhood component with some of the critical community improvements, partnerships for different institutions, focusing on education, safety, workforce development, a number of different ideas.
Lou, let me just go back to that slide and,
Sure.
and give everyone a perspective on what the remainder of this year looks like, even in the phase of COVID-19, that they give some sense of where we stand and kind of what to expect. So in terms of Cabell itself, with the relocation process, we are down to, believe it or not, 10 families remaining in the property. And between now and June 15th to June 30th, they will all be relocated, and the property will be completely vacant. At which time we will look to start, the demolition process there. And it would be our expectation that, Cabell itself would be, kind of take a good look at it now. By the end of the year, it's given our schedule and timelines, that will be gone and no longer there, just the land itself. That's a huge milestone for us, and I didn't want that to go by without just mentioning it, because one of the visions is how do we transform public housing and take that site and make it into something that transforms the community. And so that's a huge milestone for us. I think the other thing in terms of 2020, we talked about Callan Place. They're on Rosedale there, our first project kind of out of the ground. It's really our expectations that we have all the components of that, what I would describe as buttoned up. By that, I mean all the appropriate approvals, all the design concepts. By the approvals, I mean approvals from lenders, approvals from equity providers, approval from the city, approval from the state of Texas, that we can proceed forward with the transaction. It is quite a bit, but we need that much runway in order to really get things moving. So I think that if for any reason we don't put a bulldozer out there sometime before the end of the year, we'll be in the first quarter of 2021. So over these next 12 to 18 months, we really would expect a lot of activity to take place there to keep up not just the expectations from the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grant, but also the expectations that we laid out for through Councilwoman Bivens, through the city of Fort Worth, and also through the neighborhood stakeholders. So these first 18 months, we'll come out of the road and out of the ground very aggressive. There'll be street improvements. There'll be quite a few things taking place aside from just the housing developments and the neighborhood demolition of Cabell. So those are the things I wanted to focus in. It is a long period of time, but in the end, when you look back on this year, it will be a complete transformation of Stop 6, and as our expectation, a catalyst for so much more to take place there, aside from just what we're touching through the CNI transaction. Lou.
Thanks, Brian. Just to close out, as Brian was saying, we've got some next steps that are immediate, and what he referred to in terms of some of the approvals that we'll be going through. It is a very labor-intensive process, as you all might understand, relative to just not only just the real estate development, but also the other components that we need to continue planning and implementing so that we can continue the work on the phasing. And there is a specific period of time that the Housing Authority has to deliver the units and complete the goals and objectives that are laid out in the CNI grant. And so it's going to be very labor intensive. It's going to be, there's going to be a lot of activity, as Brian said. So we're anxious to try to turn some dirt as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that we're planning appropriately, we're designing appropriately, we're providing opportunities appropriately relative to subcontracting, suppliers, vendors, etc. And making sure that we meet all of our milestones at the same time. So with that, I think Brian and I are open to any questions or further discussion.
And thanks, Lou,
Sure.
for the presentation and the background and just a complete overview of what we had. And yes, we do want to go into discussion. I just wanted to make just some brief comments, and then we can dive in and take any questions and answers as appropriate from the timeline. But just in general, the question on the table is, who owns all this stuff? How does it get paid for? What do we do? So the housing pieces of this year, we went through 6 phases of it, and the ownership of that is owned through partnerships. It would take maybe someone with a PhD to try to figure out every piece from an org chart. But let me just try to describe it. So Fort Worth Housing Solutions will own the land, and then the improvements will be owned by a partnership that will include several partners: a general partner, limited partner, special limited partner, and they all will have roles in the transaction. And those roles include the financing. How do we finance it? What are the terms? What are the conditions? It also includes equity. No one's writing out a long check for this here, so we've got to get loans. We've got to get equity to augment the debt that goes with it. And then there's management of the property that takes place. The management company has to be approved. And then probably lastly, and most importantly, is that there's a compliance period that comes along with this here. In other words, we have to meet all the expectations of the funding sources in order to continue on with the project being in good standing. That period from a tax credit standpoint is 15 years. And then from an ownership standpoint, at some point down the road, Fort Worth Housing Solutions will end up being the complete owner of the property through one of the affiliate companies. So I just wanted to make sure that this just doesn't happen and it shows up. When Lou described kind of the timeline and the components that go into this transaction, it represents that. I think one of the other things that we want to talk about, recently we had an RFP. The RFP was for a construction support services, and that was submitted a couple of weeks ago. And there actually was interviews that took place, and an awardee was awarded. The specific agreement hasn't been agreed yet. I'll let Lou talk more specifically about that. But in that, the scope of work for that RFP and for that entity is multi-phase. One of them is Davis-Bacon, wages and payroll. That comes with any funds that, any transaction that has federal or HUD funds. And it's the same way with Section 3 business and worker program. It will also be involved with MWBE business and labor utilization. What do we do for this project? How do we incorporate MWBE into it? What percentages do we use? How does that work into the overall project? What are the comprehensive outreach service? And then community engagement initiatives. So all of those are kind of fall into that umbrella in terms of how do we get this started? When do people start making contact? What do we do? What are our next steps? And so those are the things that are very critical and important. That was one of the hurdles that we need to get through, which we've done. And I'm very pleased with not only the process, but just anxious to get things moving.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, thanks, Brian, is that from our approach as a company, we work with federal dollars all the time. We know the responsibility and the obligations that come with that. Not only are there statutory requirements in terms of Section 3 businesses involvement, but also in new Section 3 hires. We believe as a company very strongly in that. We also believe as a company very strongly in maximizing participation of local minority and women-owned businesses and providing every opportunity possible for participation by companies. To that end, we always engage a consultant that works with us that is familiar with not only the programs and processes, but also with the community to help us do the community engagement, reach out to organizations like yours, have meetings, bring people together to talk about the upcoming opportunities. How can people understand what they are, get themselves prepared to either work with a contractor or be a subcontractor or work with a subcontractor and understand the processes, procedures, requirements for all of that. So a big part of the work of the consultant is to put together a plan for that community engagement and to help us execute it. So as Brian said, we've selected a consultant. We'll be meeting with that consultant to work out finalize the scope of work, schedule, etc., and then be able to roll that out very shortly. And that relates to only our initial housing phase, the development on Cowan Place Senior at Rosedale and Stallcut. So as we move forward in the different phases and the different elements that involve construction kinds of services, we'll be continuing the same process, which is engaging the community, putting out requests for proposals or qualifications, interviewing. Usually we interview face-to-face, but under the current conditions, we weren't able to do that. Have meetings, bring people together. We'll have to see how we handle that as we go forward, given the COVID-19 situation. But that's our process. We're not, we don't come into town with the intention of knowing everything that is going on in the city. We learn from our partners and learn by engaging with folks like yourselves. So just wanted to add to what Brian said about that particular step.
Okay, this is Daryl. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm cutting you off. I apologize because I have 12:52 and we generally go to 1 o'clock.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of questions, etc. Now, did you get to the end of your presentation?
I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Because there's a ton of questions, and I probably got a bunch myself. But one of the things I want to say before you start answering, sometimes I talk to developers, I talk to these types of situations, and I feel like I'm talking to a bunch of politicians. Not saying that to you guys, but we need to know where the rubber meets the road, because these projects are coming up, and I'm not going to talk about the past, but the reality is that African Americans overall on these, usually on these types of projects, are getting 2% or less of the dollars. So to tell the community that, well, we're going to put something in place, we're going to make sure we're pro, we want to take care of all of the minority participation, we're going to do these types of things, and we got one, and when the smoke clears, we have 1 or 2% participation, is just not acceptable, period. But certainly in Stop 6, that was originally settled by African Americans. And so there's a lot of passion from the residents who are still there. There's a lot of passion from the residents, from people who grew up there and live somewhere else and still care about it. So I would like for you to talk about specifically what's going to happen at Cowan, because that's the next phase, that is going to be different than has happened in the other developments regarding in the past. I'm just going to say in the past because I don't call them name, just tell me that. And because we have a public and private partnership, so to me that means we don't have to go by all the so in the private industry, they can have whoever they want. They could choose to have 95% participation. They could choose to have 0. Okay, so therefore, but in the public sector, there's some requirements and some laws, etc. So I think, to me, that we ought to be able to put some things in place to ensure that our participation among African Americans should be higher than it has been in the past. And I don't think that we should use hide behind laws and things like that. Not to say that you are, but if you chose, I just think we could do better. I think we ought to, I want to hear what your plan is. And surely you have a plan. So can Brian or Lou, both of you guys, either one of you talk to that?
Lou, go ahead and start it off, and then I'll add after that.
Sure. Well, Daryl, certainly there are goals. The funds that we're using do have rules and regulations. There are no, they're federal funds, HUD funds.
Hold on, I want to be clear though.
Yeah.
Did you tell me that this is a partnership and we have private we have private investors? Am I right or wrong about that?
The private investors in the housing that's going to be developed, yes.
That's Cowan Place, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we have private investors. That means if it's a private investor, to me that sounds like money.
Well, what happens with that, how a private investor gets involved is through the acquisition of federal low-income housing tax credits. So they acquire and invest in these affordable housing mixed income developments by actually acquiring federal low-income housing tax credits. So that's a IRS HUD program that allows developers that do this sort of development to seek the credits from the state agency, and then have them allocated to a development. And then those federal credits are then made available to an investor. And that pricing that's available for those credits then it results in equity for the development. So there's still a federal program.
So, but you said those are, I'm trying to be clear because, you know, we just need to, because we got a lot of people out there, they want to be clear. So when you say a credit, that's not like they got a loan from the government, it's a tax credit, correct?
Yeah, it's a low-income housing tax credit. It's
Okay,
an
so
IRS
then
program under section 42 of the IRS code.
Okay, so then, so they get a tax credit, but they still, that individual investor still has to go out and get some private money or money, they go out and get private money. Is that right or wrong?
No, it's typically they are financial institutions that are the
Okay, so they use
investors.
their own money. So they use their own money.
That's correct.
Okay,
Or
So
funds
again-
funds that they create within their institutions to invest in these types of products.
okay, still, it's private money, right?
Darryl, hold on one second.
Yeah.
So we don't,
Yes.
let me just say this here, and Darryl, the funds that come in, they come in under a HUD and a federal tax credit program, and are subject to the HUD and federal rules. And so the money source, how they come into the project, is based on the principles of that they will get a credit for that going forward. And so however the flow of funds come in from wherever they originate from, at this point, is not relevant. What they're getting, what they're buying into is a credit, and it's a federal program. And so, rather than to go into the specifics of that program, it is a federal program, and that's why it's designed so that we're able to build the properties that we build under under these specific provisions. So it is a federal program, and we can talk much more in depth about that.
But no, we need to
so that we don't get to that
understand, because
point.
we're trying to be clear, because this is very important to the community, whether or not, so because where the rubber meets the road is this. Because of wherever the money comes from, does that mean it has to be treated like if it were a quote unquote true federal project, or is this more of, since it's a private public, can then money be allocated to spend on however they want to spend it, so to speak? Meaning like, okay, instead of having to go through a bid process for the parking lot, let's just say, you could just say, you know what, we're going to set that aside for African Americans. We're going to set aside 10% or 5% or what have you for African Americans, because this is not a true quote unquote federal program that we have to go through all of these other requirements that's federal. And I just want to be clear on that one way or the other, because I get these types of questions and the community wants to know.
Well, we can be very clear then and transparent. It is a federal program, and there are HUD dollars that come into it. As a result, it is subject to those rules that come from HUD. So that I can't be any more clear than that. So I think what I wanted to add to that, Darryl, and I think for the listeners who are also on there as well, is that one of the reasons for I'm having a consultant work with us on this here, and then I really expect to have meetings with you and your group as well, you being Fort Worth Black Chamber, and then your group, is to start having this conversation so that we know that what we have, what we don't have, and we can design programs specifically for that. There is not a program on the HUD website that makes a distinction, and so don't hate the messenger on this here. There's not a program that distinguishes what I'm going to describe as for African Americans only. It's for MWBE, which includes everyone. However, given Stop 6, given the neighborhood, given that, I think there are some things and some ways that we can work through that in order to accomplish the goals and the objectives that we want to do at the same time, without saying this amount is carved out for African Americans. Stop 6 is a predominantly African-American neighborhood. It's been an underserved market for some time. And I think that there is room for that. And that's where we should be having the dialogue. And that's what I would expect. That's what I would like to see as well. That we start, now that we've got this in place, the runway is ready. We're putting together the team. Now we should be sitting down and having that conversation. What do we do? How do we do it? What makes sense? How do we fit in? What's the value that we add? Those are all things that we expect to have, and I would like to have with you all as well.
Well, that's awesome. And the purpose of one of the reasons that we're doing this is we want this on the record for the people to see and to know that this is what we want to, this is what you guys are committing to do. Because, we look around and it's not just, whether it's housing solutions or what have you, but there are a lot of public entities. And when the smoke clears, when you peel back the minority numbers that might look good at 20% or 25%, when you peel it back and you get down close to it, you get down and you find that we got 1 or 2% African Americans. And I'm not ashamed to say, but it is what it is. We're the Fort Worth Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce, and that's where our constituents, and that's what we are looking for to ensure that we get a reasonable piece of the pie. And if we're roughly 20% of the population here in Fort Worth, that we pay taxes, that we pay sales taxes, and that this money is federal money, which means it's taxpayer money, that we get a better piece of the pie than 2%. And that's just what's been happening for a number of years. And we look and we wonder why our community is what it is because there's not enough investment going there. And this is not for you personally, Brian, but it's just the reality of what we have been experiencing. And I think that this time is a new day, and where y'all means all, and we are trying to make sure that these things happen. And there's plenty of questions in. So I want to go back to.
So Darrell, if I could just say one thing before we pivot here, is that I think that this is a great opportunity for all. I or you, none of us can undo the past. I just can't. I wish I could. But look at this as an opportunity, and with that opportunity, and then what value that we bring to this here for a long-term play. That's the beauty, I think, what we're doing here, and that's what our expectations are. It's not to go back, whatever we want to call it, business as usual. I'm passionate about this here. I want to see this happen, and I think that there's a place for this here, and that's what I would expect. So, that gives the opportunity now for Stop 6, for Cowan Place to jump out on the right phase and the right steps.
Awesome, glad to hear it. So I do want to go, because you mentioned that your expectations by the end of the year that Cavill will be leveled by that time. And so is that asbestos in Cavill? I don't know. I'm just asking that question.
Yes.
Okay. Because
there's environmental. There's some
folks already been asking me. Cecil want to know.
I think it's great. Now once we get everything lined up, Darrell, Cecil, whomever, what environmental takes place. It has to be done right, and it has to be monitored. There's a lot of components to come to an abatement, a demo and an abatement. And so it's very technical, and it's not for everybody, but I think that to the extent that there are people there, that's a good time for them to come to the table. So, okay. I'm excited about it. I'm excited.
That sounds great. There's a question they want to know if this presentation, the PowerPoint, will be available to the public, so that I guess whether it's posted on your website, that might be a good place for it.
We sent it to you.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll post it. Yeah, but I sent it to you, so you have access.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
And it is public. I'm not adverse to that. It's public.
Okay. And so people are asking, and I'm going to probably deal with this. Y'all may want to as well. People are asking about grocery stores and dollar stores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is, nobody can make anyone do anything for the most part here in America. And so when you have businesses and you say, well, we want a grocery store over here because we don't have one, the business is, can I make some money over there? And that's the business of business. It is to make money. And so if they feel like if I put it over here, I'm not going to make money like I would make it someplace else, or if I put it over here, it's going to be, my margins are going to be smaller, et cetera, they're not going to do it. So that's the bottom line to it. And I'm just as an answer to people. But is there a, I heard that, is there a place in the plan for a grocery store that you know
Currently,
of?
there's not. Currently, there's not a grocery store as part of the plan. But that also represents the opportunity for for that to take place.
Okay. And also just for people to understand that while this is happening, Cavill, redevelopment of Cavill and Cowan Place, there is other aspects of the city that's going on to go into this development. For instance, Trinity Metro is looking at redesigning and currently in the process of redesigning all of its bus routes. So when you have more condensed population, then that makes that process better and more efficient. So you will see that happening as well to help. So when you get more people there and you got buses and the buses are more efficient, then it looks like, and you have higher income there, it looks like a place that an investor would like to invest a grocery store. So that's the reality of that situation.
Yeah, at least, yeah, Darryl, you're right, because at least the plan is creating more rooftops, certainly, and more economic integration there as well to attract new businesses. And you're right, because the market is going to drive those decisions on the part of those kinds of businesses.
All right, so who, Denise, are you listening?
I'm here.
Do you see any other questions in the chat box, or Carlita?
Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of questions.
Oh, and is okay. Oh, let me just stop here because it is.
Some of them are in the Q&A for some reason.
Okay, just in the interest of time, Brian and Lou, do you guys have more time? Because I see it's 1:08. I'm good. I can talk, and we can go on because I think this is important. But I don't know about your schedule. How much time do you guys have available, or if you have any more time available?
Yeah, why don't we give it another 15 minutes and see where we get at that point?
Okay. All right, Denise, please.
All right, so I'm gonna start with the Q&As.
And don't give any comments. Just ask questions. Just ask questions. No comments.
Tiffany McCrae asks, has any talk of tiny houses communities been mentioned?
Okay, I can
It hadn't been
start with
mentioned.
that.
I don't know if that.
No, so I guess the question is, has it been mentioned? Yes or no? The answer is yes. But tiny houses, I think that, and I think that the Gina, Councilwoman Bivens, and the city has some restrictive covenants on what takes place on certain blocks, and so it will be more of a city and a planning issue than housing solutions. So I can go back to the answer again. Has it been mentioned? The answer is yes. So the question is, did it gain any headway? Was there any headwinds to move it? And the answer to that was no. So I don't know where that's going to end up, but that's a little bit outside of what we'll be doing and providing a little bit more higher density than the single family homes there.
Same
Okay.
person asked, are there any plans to upgrade the exterior houses that already exist and will remain in stop 6? How many years is this upgrade expected to take?
Okay, I'll answer that again. The Neighborhood Services Department at the City of Fort Worth currently has multiple programs for upgrades on housing. I think they have facade upgrades. They have window and door upgrades. They have multiple programs that they have, and we've got a bond election coming up pretty soon. I think there will be some items in there that will also be impactful for current residents or current homeowners to be able to tap into some sources to assist in that, to upgrade their homes.
So let me respond to that as well. I think that's Victor Turner's department. So if you have that, you want to email Victor directly, you can get that through the city of Fort Worth, Victor Turner, and he's in neighborhood services. Okay, Denise.
Okay. Same person asked what type of education training will be provided for the current residents to be able to learn and have an opportunity to be a homeowner or business owner within this department.
Okay, there. So that's kind of three questions. But the first piece of that, education. When you get a chance to look at the overall plan, education is a critical part of that. And within that education, there's a proposed new school, ideal schools. There's a proposed $80 million in upgrades to the current schools there. Young Men's Leadership Academy, Dunbar, and then possibly the elementary school there. So there is expectations for improvements to the schools. The second part of the question is with respect to, I think it might have alluded to home ownership training. I think that that's another thing that we can work with. We don't have it with what we're doing, but we can work with Victor Turner and the city of Fort Worth and provide some home ownership training and home ownership classes. I love them. I think they're valuable. I think they're a great tool. I'm going to make that suggestion myself, whoever asked the question. I think that's a great idea. I love it.
Wonderful.
Hey, Brian, just a real quick, the transformation plan is on your website, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so people can download the entire plan that talks about all the elements of choice if they'd like to from Solutions website.
Okay.
All right, so this one's from an anonymous person. Will there be opportunities for sustainable development / materials to be incorporated? Is there an opportunity to pitch to the developers?
Yeah, sustainable materials, sustainable development, how we address water on site and off site are all components of our design. So yeah, we design to enterprise green community standards and incorporate those standards in all of our design work. In terms of pitching to the developer, I guess it depends on what is the pitch. Our approach is to engage a contractor, which we did early in this particular project, first phase, but that contractor will be subbing out majority of the work to subcontractors. So they will be looking for pitches from either subcontractors, framers, plumbers, electricians, vendors, suppliers, etc. And as we get closer to the process, we'll be rolling out, and that's what some of the work of our consultant that's working with us to roll out those initial meetings and provide information about the opportunities as they come on.
Lou, let me ask.
Mm-hmm.
Lou, did you just say that you have a general contractor already? Did you just say that?
That's right. We went out early on this particular phase and went through an RFP process and selected a general contractor. And that general contractor then will be responsible for engaging subcontractors.
So what's the name of the general contractor?
Name of the contractor is. I'm sorry.
And is this the contractor for Cowan Place, correct? Which is the senior living, correct? Uh-oh, we lost audio for Lou.
I don't know what happened there.
Okay, we got you now.
The company is Block Companies. They're out of Houston. And they've done quite a bit of work, I think, with Fort Worth Housing Solutions in the past on other types of projects in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And good, what we call affordable mixed income kind of company. They believe in the principles that we have as well in terms of participation. With,
Lou,
yes,
I'm cutting you off, excuse me. So you don't know the name. Okay. They're out of Houston.
just did block companies.
Oh, that's the name of block companies. I thought you
Yeah.
were saying it was a blocker company.
No. No, block companies is the name of the organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about
So
that. I don't know why
companies
I don't know why my thing was going on and off, but anyway, block,
So-
B-L-O-C-K, yes.
So Block Companies is the general contractor from Houston, correct? And you guys chose them how long ago, roughly?
We've had them on board now for at least a couple of months or maybe a little longer. Again, it was a decision that we made when we were selecting our design team and our construction consultant or contractor, bring them on early in the process so that they can help us through the design process and cost estimating, etc. So I believe, Brian, it must be now 2-3 months or so.
Yep, 2 or 3 months. Both the general contractor is Block Companies. The design team is Bennett Benner Partners. And then they have their subs underneath them. So yes.
So this is one of the things that gives the Black community heartburn, because they'll be like, well, I could have been helped out on, I got architects, I could have helped out on the design team. Maybe I could have been the general contractor for Cowan Place. And so now that it comes out, now it's water under the bridge. And obviously that was probably millions of dollars of opportunity that it doesn't look like the community here in Fort Worth had an opportunity to bid on. I'm just saying that's what it looked like to the community. So it gives us heartburn.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't, hold on a second. I
Yeah,
don't know
sure.
about all that. I mean, the process in the selection was the same process for all of the RFQs and that we had, including the one that we just did for construction services. You know, how it was advertised, where it was notified, the meetings that were held, et cetera. So, you know,
So you said this was a bid process, Brian, you're saying this was a bid process for the general contractor design, that whole thing that went out to the general public, and everybody had an opportunity who wanted to bid on it to bid on it.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, it wasn't a bid on drawings or anything like that, Daryl. It was a request for qualifications. We got responses, we did interviews, and we made a selection.
Where was
Okay.
it published?
Khalida
Where
had a
was it
question.
posted?
Brian, did you hear Khalida? She had a question. She
Did
wanted to
not.
know where it was posted, and how did y'all do your outreach for those RFQ, RFP?
I mean, I'll need to, Daryl and Cleta, I'll need to get you all the specific places. They are specifically where we post every transaction. We also passed them out through the city of Fort Worth. It was on the city of Fort Worth's website, and all the traditional publications, et cetera. So, but yeah, I don't know exactly each one, but
Okay.
you know, we'll get that for you. But
Okay, I appreciate
it was part of the public process as well.
that. And that's one of the reasons, one of my passions is that I hate that our community seems to always be a day late and a dollar short. So that's one of my passions, to try to make sure that we get pertinent information out to our community, so that we won't be upset after the fact, but rather that we had the information ahead of time in order to bid. And if we didn't win the bid, okay, but at least we knew about it and we took the time and the opportunity to participate in the process. Denise, do you have any other questions?
We have a lot of questions and not enough time. So if they can reach out to you all with these questions, that would be great. But I can continue to read a few of them, because we did the ones on the Q&A. I want to hit some of the ones on the live.
Okay.
Okay, Daryl
Uh-huh.
and Denise,
Yes.
what I'd like for us to do is to take the questions that, now we may not be able to answer it all in this session.
Okay.
So what that tells us is that we need to have another one.
Okay.
But if Brian and
Luke.
Lou?
Lou are open to having those questions submitted to them and providing answers, perhaps in writing, that we can post for folks to see, because we will not be able to get all of these answered today.
Okay.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
a fact.
Right.
Be happy to.
May I suggest that, I think Darrell and the chamber, I mean, this, this is ways that we can start working together. If you pull those together, we can kind of sit down together and go through them and start the dialogue so that the connection, we don't have to go back and do dress rehearsal. Why did we do this or why did we do that? Let's use this as a starting point to begin the process for us trying to do some things together.
All right. Sounds like a great plan.
So I mean, I don't want to dismiss any of it. I want to, if I can, take every single question that's there. But some of them, Darrell and you guys can address a lot of them, through our dialogue.
Sure.
So
Exactly.
I want to make sure that we introduce not just to the people on the line, but the others to the consulting team, and that's a good time for us to sit down and go through it.
Okay.
I mean, the questions and answer are one thing, but I mentioned earlier that the expectation is that this goes just beyond some dialogue back and forth. So if we're going to have some meaningful outcomes, and I mean meaningful, then bring the parties together so we can have the dialogue. And
Okay.
we through We Housing Solutions, through McCormick Barron, our master developer and the consultant, that will be a good time for us to visit.
All right. We'll do that. And when you guys are ready to try to introduce some of the other players to the community, we'll be happy to do that as well. And absolutely, we'll get together. And I know my president, D. Jennings, be happy to have contact. And by the way, for the community, we talk with Housing Solutions really on a regular basis. So forgive my confrontational style, but it's just that we just need to get some of these questions answered for the community. So.
Well, one thing, Darrell, not to mean to interrupt you, I mean, now's the opportunity. And so what we can't do is I mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to reiterate it. I can not, nor can you undo anything that took place in the past. This represents the opportunity. Let's put it on the table and see what we have. That's the invite.
All right, that's exciting. We thank you, Brian and Lou, for coming out and giving us your time, your expertise, and explaining what's going on in Cabell. We know there's a lot more conversation to have to go forward with this. And at this point, I want to turn it back over to Carlita just to, if she didn't leave, to end the Minority Leaders and Citizens Council lunch. Carlita?
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. We had great participation online as well as on Facebook Live. You guys have submitted some absolutely wonderful questions, and I know there's lots of concern. One of the questions that was asked, was the session recorded? It is, and it will be made available so that you can listen back in or share.
Yes, it's on the Facebook of the Fort Worth Black Chamber. So all of our webinar meetings are on there.
And we'll post it on MLCC's Facebook page as well. So again, thank you, Lou and Brian, and for dealing with Darrell's in your face And Daryl, thank you for doing that because it expressed some of what we're seeing in the chat and in the Q&A. So again, thank you everyone for being here. It seems like we get a lot more people online than we do in person, and that's wonderful. So, you know, this may be a wave of the future, but no, Daryl wants lunch. So we will be back as soon as we can open up safely, we will. And we hope to see you all again. And next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We will send out the link for next week as soon as possible before the end of this week. And we'll see you all next Wednesday. And thank you to the Chamber for facilitating this.
Nice to meet
And Daryl.
Nice to meet you all. Look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Same here.
Okay.
Everybody have a great day.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Thank you.
Bye.